Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.1 tier list. I hope you've all had a great time over the holidays and the whole Mobalytics team is wishing you well for this new year. I'm Danox Harrison and it's time to get stuck into the first patch for not only 2021 but also season 11, which will be live in a couple of days. So get strapped in and ready for all the info you need to make your dive back into ranked solo queue. So starting off in the top lane as per usual, in the God tier we have Nasus, Darius and Malphite, and the S tier we have Wukong, Teemo, Garen, Pantheon and Shen. We've seen the likes of Kayle and Maokai finally get pushed out of S tier. Maokai suffered from consistent nerfs to the Sunkfire Aegis and eventually it was enough to bring him down from his spot with the elites. Combine that with Grievous Wounds being buffed this patch and Maokai definitely isn't as strong as he was when that preseason started. Aatrox is another champion who's not directly being changed, but with Goredrinker becoming marginally less broken and Grievous Wounds lasting 3 seconds instead of 2, he will be that much weaker, which has pushed him down to B. Kayle's nerfs on 1025 definitely didn't make her unplayable, but were enough to knock her down a step, especially with the amount of champs abusing Stridebreaker to close the gap and run her down. Now Tryndamere has started to find his feet with the buffs to Kraken Slayer providing him a solid mythic to run with, and Navori Quickblade syncing really well with his ability to reduce the cooldown on his dash. Now first up with our top lane highlights we have Nasus, and he is back. He's had a series of buffs, most recently a reduce to his Q cooldown and get an instant flat resist when he pops his ultimate. As a result he's dishing out a ton of damage in the top lane and honestly it's just business as usual. Survive the early game, get stacks, carry. Defiant Sundra syncs really well with him, giving armor and magic pen, allowing him to increase the damage on his Q and R, and following up there's a range of solid options, but Frozen Art has really been performing well when you don't need magic resist. The CDR, mana and flat reduction to attacks just helps you do Q more often and survive longer. Nasus is still going to struggle into bullies, but if you do find yourself behind then freezing is your friend, and if you can stall the game out long enough you can become an absolute monster. Garen is another champ who was doing well in Season 10 at low-elo but wasn't hitting that same mark in the preseason. Now he's been utilised in Stridebreaker and has been popping off as a result. The critical thing with this item is it makes you incredibly sticky, which has always been Garen's big issue. He now has a dash that applies a slow and on top of that gets a massive help of movement speed between the mythic passive and the buff it applies. The build is a fair bit tankier than the Triforce build we saw in Season 10 and as a result it's a lot more about getting down your sustained damage rather than huge bursts to kill them in a QER combo. Against squishies you'll still be able to melt them and you have the option of Ignite to guarantee those kills. Spam your Stridebreaker, trade around your Q silence and get spinning and you'll be good to go. Pantheon lost the ability to block tower shots with his E and in return he gains so many buffs that he's destroying in the solo lanes. One of the biggest changes was the free percentage armor penetration he gets from putting points in his ultimate. It means he's capable of decimating even those stacking armor and he gets massive spikes at level 6 and 11. Your E isn't as versatile in terms of blocking damage, once again it doesn't work on towers, but also with your passive fully stacked you don't get extra duration, but what you do get is a movement speed buff. Typically your trading pattern consists of stunning, triple autoing and hitting them with your spear, and then E with passive stacked and using the movement speed at the end to get completely clear. Particularly into champions like Darius who love extended trades, this is really effective for getting out the fight afterwards. If you're looking for a fun time in top lane, then I'd suggest banning Pantheon because it is not a fun experience going up against him right now. Moving on to the jungle. In the God tier we have Nunu, Kha'Zix and Udyr, and in the S tier we have Olaf, Vi, Hecarim, Rammus, Ivern and Echo. A fairly big shift up in junglers, notably Graves and Kayn have both been knocked down. Graves was struggling a bit in lower elos and with the nerf to his base AD he's just not capable of retaining S tier. Kayn got heavy nerfs last patch and honestly should have dropped in tier then, but I'll be honest I underestimated it, so that's my bad, but he is still playable in the right scenario, however no longer one of the best champions in the game. Echo is finding more of a footing in the jungle after his increased damage to monsters, capable of clearing better and really easily securing objectives with how much damage you can combo with his 3-hit passive and E. Elise has been making a solid resurgence, but with nerfs coming to the Night Harvester, I have tentatively put her in A tier. If it wasn't for those nerfs, I think she would have actually made it into S this patch. She's doing really well on skirmishes and with tanks off the menu, she's faring much better at popping squishies. Nidalee has rejoined the list after some solid quality of life buffs that made her spears just far stronger. Still a hard to execute champ who's not a great recommendation for lower elo players to learn, but if you are a Nidalee main then she's in a good spot to pick up again. We did also see some nerfs to Master Yi. Don't think it's quite enough to put him into B tier, but he should be a tad less effective on this patch. I fully understand if you're going to keep permabanning him though, and I don't blame you. Nothing is more frustrating than a Fed-Yi. Our jungle highlights start with Ivern, and Ivern got some pretty big buffs last patch, and after things settled he ended up in a really good spot. I will come in with a caveat, 2 of these buffs have been reverted on this patch, but a jungle expert strongly felt that these are the less impactful buffs that came through, and he should still be in a solid spot. Not quite god tier, but the shorter shield CD and more reliable Daisy mean he's really effective, especially if you have a strong carry to keep safe. Ivan isn't everyone's cup of tea, and definitely a different style of champion compared to your typical jungler, but if you have some experience with him, he's primed to earn you some LP this patch. Olaf has been doing monstrously well. Gordrinker is just insane on him and allows him to thrive far further into the game than he typically does. The teamfighting potential is massive, especially if you can hit multiple people with your active. Now I will say that Gordrinker did just get nerfed, so if you're hitting 5 opponents with it, you're not healing quite as much, but in honesty, the healing in those scenarios was just insane, and you're still just as effective in smaller skirmishes. For that reason, Olaf doesn't make it to god tier, but he's definitely S material. If you like winning fights in the early game and smashing face in the mid game, then Olaf is the champ for you. I will never get bored of talking about Udyr. This champ is simple and easy to find success on, and he does so much damage with just a Lich Bane as a damage option. His skirmishing power is great, and in all honesty, it's just super fun to play, running circles around the enemy team as they struggle to kill you. If you want big impact in early ganks and skirmishes, or even just want to farm your way to dominance, then Udyr can excel at both. Now a little tip for Phoenix Udyr, despite Phoenix being max first and doing huge damage, it's actually better to start Tiger to help you early clear. It's better at clearing single target camps like your buffs, and being able to go from Tiger to Phoenix is better at clearing than grabbing your bear or turtle stance, as the attack speed really helps to DPS. A strong early full clear can put Udyr in a really solid spot to get rolling in the mid game and become almost unkillable while dishing out tons of damage. Now in the mid lane, in the god tier we have Fizz, Echo and Pantheon, and the S tier we have Annie, Malzahar, Galio, Victor, Seraphine, Anivia and Yone. A lot more S tier mids. Seraphine has been looking better and better, and we saw instant reflection last patch for a support performance, but mid took a little bit longer. Pantheon we already discussed regarding top lane, and honestly mid lane is a great home for him, able to bully matchups and roam to the side lanes pretty easily. Anivia is just insane after her buffs, even after she was hotfix nerfed. If you're confident on the champ, it's an easy win if the enemy can't pressure you. And we did also see Kayle struggle after changes in 1025. We were tentative about keeping her in S and she was just on the edge, but ultimately the nerfs were a bit too much for her to handle and she has now slipped down to A tier. Seraphine is doing really well in mid lane. As I said before, it took a bit of time for buffs to be reflected there, which is funny considering they were labelled Seraphine mid buffs and helped her more immediately in support, but I digress. Her wave clear is solid and she has good utility on her W, which shines when paired up with a team, but the huge power she has is in a just entire team fighting kit thanks to her CC. Her ultimate is absolutely insane in choke points. Every time it hits an enemy or ally, its travel distance resets, so if you fire it through a team fight, it can stretch for miles and hit multiple enemies. It's so easy to single-handedly carry a team fight with this champion. On top of that, there is a really cool interaction when she picks up Rylai's. It's not typically something you take first or second, but when you do manage to get it maybe third item, the reason it works so well is her E applies a route to slow targets, and if you have Rylai's, it applies the slow before her E calculates. So after you completed it, her E always roots, and if you have a passive up to cast it twice, it'll always stun. It's a huge buff to a team fight and control when you hit that point, but in all honesty, just a core kit is super strong in the right scenario. She's not as good when isolated, so beware about being caught out alone or in a duel, as you can be vulnerable, especially if you're not able to easily land your ultimate if you're against something like a Zed or a Fizz. Yone is looking really strong. Last patch, he got a big buff in the form of his attack speed growth, and that helped with one of the major preseason issues both he and Yasuo have had. Going shield bow into IE did not give you enough attack speed to hit your cap for your Q cooldown. This change has helped a lot, and as a result his win rate has gone up hugely, also in part to the crit item buffs. We did this patch see a change, with crit items now given 2.5 times the base chance for both him and Yasuo. He did have his AD growth nerfed a little bit in compensation, but what this means is your 1 to 2 item spikes are huge, particularly 2 items, as it now puts you at a clean 100% crit chance. Yone is really frustrating to play against thanks to the strength of his E and his ability to dive the backline with limited counterplay. These changes have put his itemization in a good spot, and if you get rolling, you can easily dominate a game. Echo is looking really solid, and one of the big reasons he's a highlight for this patch is a lot of the active items have been toned down a bit in return for stat buffs. Echo has been thriving with Rocket Belt, and although it did have its active damage buffed, it's not that big of a deal as you don't build Rocket Belt for the active damage. The stats are now better, and you still get the movement speed buff, so Echo can still get in and find executes onto squishies before getting out again. The movement speed also helps line up your W stun for those huge teamfight moments. Now, Night Harvester was an alternate build path on 1025, but it also got its damage nerfed on this patch, and you know, with the Night Harvester, it's very much about that damage you get for the active, so with that selling point reduced quite a bit, I think this firmly solidifies Rocket Belt as the stronger option, at least for the time being. Going into the ADs, in the God tier we have Jhin, Misfortune and Swain. In the S tier we have Tristana, Ashe, Kai'Sa and Vayne. And now going into itemization, the big thing for this patch is Runans. It's lost its AD and the AoE attacks don't scale to 70% anymore, but in return it's 900 gold cheaper. That level of discount is insane. For champions that utilize it well like Ashe and Twitch, they can hit their spikes easier and look to finish their third item Infinity Edge far sooner than they did in the previous patches. Now we did also see big buffs to Varus, Sivir and Xayah, and although they're nice, not going to complain about them, we expect to see the win rate go up a bit. I just don't think it fixes their core issues, and it didn't really justify a shift up in their tier, at least not yet. Compared to the S tier AD carries, they just don't hold a candle, and it won't be a fun experience going up against Misfortune on any of them. Now also, Manamune did get nerfed quite heavily on this patch, now having a lower proc damage in return for slightly higher AD conversion, and applying on magic damage as well. All in all, for most AD carries utilizing it, this is a pretty hefty nerf, as it also got hit with an extra 300 gold to its cost. If you have an option to avoid it, like Kai'Sa with a different build, I would do so. For Misfortune, who's been building it a lot, I would probably just sit on their tier and leave it as that. And for Ezreal, well, you know, it's just unlucky. Onto our highlighted champions, Kai'Sa is a favourite for AD carry players and she's been doing better and better on recent patches. With the cheaper cost of Runan, she's in a great spot to start dominating games early. You may be concerned about losing that extra 25 AD when it comes to evolving your Q, but since Runan's is 900 gold cheaper, you can simply put that money towards a pickaxe which you'll build into your Infinity Edge later. This isn't her only build. A really popular one has been Kraken Slayer into Collector for huge burst damage and a massive amount of AD. It doesn't have the same consistent damage as a Runan's build, and you're not going to get your evolvers early, but it does allow you to play Assassin Kai'Sa, which is particularly strong into champions like Ezreal. Once again, with the Manamune nerf, I don't rate that build at the moment, so I would stick to a Kraken first option. Twitch got some huge buffs in patch 1025, and I cannot think of a champion who will better utilize the cheaper Runans. Twitch's 3-item spike is absolutely massive, and it just got 900 gold cheaper, and on top of that your 2-item is that much easier to achieve as well. Twitch can have some rough moments in the laning phase, but with strong support you can find windows to succeed in longer trades. Just be cautious about picking him into Jhin or Misfortune, as they can bully him out from a range. Mid to late is where you excel, and Twitch is huge at carrying teamfights. His damage is massive, and the cheaper spike just means you hit that point that much sooner. Personally, I'm a big fan of heavy CC support because it only takes a few autos for you to decide a teamfight. Things like Nord, Leona or Rakan are really solid, and with the buff to Shurelya's, they can help you get in position even better. Swain is stomping games at the moment. His level 6 all-in is so incredibly strong thanks to the extra HP and power of his ultimate, and his build path still feels really slick. With Zhonya's being so cheap, it's an easy pickup to extend your survivability and utilize your healing, and if you pair him with an aggressive CC support, you can follow up with your Yank to not only secure opponent's fate, but also stack some extra HP. Now Swain does fall off in the late game compared to your typical AD carries, but his mid game is so powerful, especially if the enemy team has dive or bruisers, who typically are really problematic for ADCs. You have a much harder time beating through a Swain's health bar, and if multiple opponents are diving you, then it means you can pop your Zhonyas and heal back up while you drain them down. If you're tired of getting season 11'd, then Swain may be the option for you. Into supports. God tier we have Leona and Maokai, and then in the S tier we have Janna, Morgana, Nami, Seraphine, Lulu, Zillion and Thresh. So there has been some pretty big shift ups with supports that I want to dive into, particularly around itemization. First and foremost, the Shurelya's buff. It has now gone from 40% to 60% movement speed, and the reason that's significant is you actually found a lot of the engaged supports like Alistar and Set who really wanted movement speed choose to go Turbo Chem Tank instead as a Mythic. It's far more expensive and doesn't give the increased speed to your allies as well, but it gave 75% movement speed, which is just so much bigger than that 40%. Since the Shurelya's buff, it's now actually worth building it instead. You get a little bit less speed for yourself, but it's a far cheaper item, and giving it to your allies instead is a massive benefit. I expect to see this transition come in, and it'll not only make Shurelya's better, but could allow those supports who are utilizing it to rise up in priority. Next is the buff to Ionians. Not many champions actually build these boots in other roles. For the most part, the defensive boots, Sork shoes or Berserkers are more commonly taken. In the support role, however, you actually see a lot of enchanters taking Ionians for the extra CDR, and although 5 ability haste doesn't seem like a huge amount, it's actually a really solid spike to have 20 available on such a cheap item. Typically, supports who wanted early CDR would invest into items like Kindle Gem or Glacial Shroud or Band of Glass Mirror, and considering these boots now offer their ability haste doubled in a single 900 gold item, it's a definite steal. If you're hunting for CDR and the likes of something like Zilean, then I think this change is a little bit of a sleeper buff, and I wouldn't be surprised to see these boots getting built more and more on those champions I was talking about. In terms of changes, we did see some upward trends. Rakan's is down to the Chevaliers buff, and for the likes of Shaco and Pantheon, they actually are doing far better than we initially anticipated after the changes at 10.25, with the change to the mandate and also Pantheon having that mini rework coming in. Karma did receive a buff this patch to a shield, but it's only a 40 shield increase at max rank, which really doesn't fix her issues. Karma just doesn't scale as well as other enchanters, and she's vulnerable in lane. If you compare this buff to Seraphine's last patch, Seraphine's made her laning more safe from level 1, which allows her to get to a strong late game. Karma doesn't get any early health from this buff, so she's still vulnerable to early all-in, and her late game is still a bit mediocre in comparison. Ultimately, she needs more than this to start climbing up the ranks of supports. So, after a little bit of a dive into support itemization, we can talk a bit about a rising star on the current patch. Maokai is doing absolute work in the support role. Going Imperial Mandate into Demonic Embrace, and with Aftershock as well, he's tanky enough to soak a fair bit of damage. This isn't anything special in the support role, especially when you look at the likes of Leona or Alistair, but the big thing is he's able to lay down damage with his CC and frustrate the enemy team with sapling placement in combination with Imperial Mandate. Initially, I was concerned that the reduced application damage from Mandate would hold him back, as his saplings won't always have an ally nearby to proc the damage, but ultimately the item being cheaper and the raw damage from the sapling itself was enough to firmly find him a spot not only in S tier, but in God tier. If you're playing Maokai, then just be cautious not to play in like the top lane counterpart, because you aren't as tanky. But locking down a target and applying Mandate to them is an easy recipe to blow up single enemies, especially if they're trying to dive your backline. I talked a bit before about the change we saw to Chevaliers being strong with engaged supports, and I think this is a great time to highlight Alistair. Although he's a tad vulnerable in the early laning phase thanks to his level 1 being pretty useless, once he hits 3 he has really solid all-in with his combo and stun. Get him to 6 and he can serve as a really powerful frontline, and Chevaliers allows him and his team to get in position for the engages. There are 2 options in the runes, Aftershock and Phase Rush. The former allows for more tankiness, particularly in lane, and the latter is great at landing your E-stun after your combo and keeping on top of opponents, which shines later on. I will say that with Chevaliers you're way less reliant on Phase Rush to give yourself movement speed, and it's often synced with Locket. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is there is some flexibility, so try what works for you. Either way, you'll be tanky and capable of those huge playmaking combos to carry from the support role. And that covers everything we wanted to talk about for 11.1 to get you up to speed for the new season. Best of luck with your dive into ranked if you're going for it this week, but don't be disheartened if you get off to a bad start. Ultimately, if you keep playing your best, you'll quickly find yourself where you deserve to be, even if there are a few rough games to open the season. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you want to keep updated on what's strong and what's good to play for Season 11.